Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Christine Porath. I'll tell you all about Christine in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is the show that deals with what's too often called the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, compassion we exert for others. And when you do it as a leader, as you will discover that Christine is, you do it to bring people together for common cause. Christine Porath, welcome to Grace Under Pressure. So,
thanks for having me.
Great. I want to tell everybody about you. It's Professor Christine Porath, who teaches at Georgetown Business School, my alma mater, not the business school, but the university. They wouldn't let me in the business school. So anyway, and she is, and she has a brand new book out called Mastering Community. She's written many books, and I love her background because she began her academic career as a student at Holy Cross, where she played collegiate soccer and basketball. So I think some of the lessons that she teaches us are rooted in athletics. Anyway, she went on and got her PhD from University of North Carolina, and she now teaches at Georgetown. And this is her second mastering book. Her first one was called Mastering Civility. Welcome, Christine Porath.
Thanks.
Great. Well, we were joking beforehand that a couple of years ago, I was exploring the topic of grace, which led to me to write my book on grace, in which Christine is featured. Christine had already beaten me to the punch because she wrote a book, Mastering Civility. Now I discover, as I'm exploring the idea of community, guess who beats me to the punch again? It's Christine Porath with her new book, Mastering Community. So welcome. I'm just following your lead, Christine.
Oh, well, thanks. Great minds think alike. No, it's fun. I think, we both obviously believe in these topics deeply. And so I think it's great to get as much information as possible out there to folks.
That's great. So why is community so important now?
Well, I think, even before the pandemic, isolation and a sense of loneliness was at an all-time high. I mean, this has been trending sadly for decades. And I was just seeing a lot of that, even in my own life, and the idea of not knowing neighbors as well, church.
We don't need any sad stories, Christine. Cut to the chase. No, that's great.
Yeah, it's true. And, I noticed that and read about church participation going down so much, for a long time now. And, just the sense of, even in the workplace, people not feeling really connected. And part of this, Tony Schwartz and I had done a large scale study with over 20,000 people. This was with Harvard Business Review. And really what we were looking at was just work and life, and also leaders' effect on people. And what surprised me is that in that data, 65% of people said they felt no sense of community at work.
Let's stop that for a second. Yeah. 2/3 of the people surveyed said they did not feel community. Did you say at work? So,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's isolating. So.
Yeah, and that was all, again, pre-pandemic stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm often asked now, did this book come out of the pandemic? And it was actually, kind of long before that. And I just felt like, similar to the civility topic, we can and should do better. And so what can we do to kind of create the sense of connection for people? Because one of the things that actually Bob Sutton and I talked about, who I think you also know.
Yes, I do know.
Is several years ago, he and I had this conversation. We wanted to write a piece about organizations as bright spots, because we actually, even though we both studied the dark side and, toxic workplace environments and rude people and all of that, we actually were seeing some really positive examples in organizations and leaders focusing on this. And so we wanted to kind of highlight what can organizations do to drive more civility, or in this case, more community. And we tried to write some op-eds, and people were not interested.
Who needs it? I can echo that, because when my first book on grace came out, it got great reviews and lots of acclaim, but it didn't sell. And it's like, who needs grace? So, well, now it's a little different. So have you seen the pandemic change our attitude toward the notion of community? So
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if anything, it's just really emphasized people's desire for it, and maybe prioritizing it more. You probably know people as well. Like, I have friends and family that have moved or made huge life changes, personal and professional, as a result of kind of really thinking deeply about valuing, in most cases, a sense of community. For some, it was family and friends, and being closer. For others, it was having work flexibility or work connection in ways that they felt really drove their happiness, their health, their well-being. And so I really believe that for organizations, but also, community level stuff, the places that do this well are going to have a competitive advantage.
it's good. So I have this theory about our values, and values create our belonging, which I would say is another sense of community. What's your perspective on that, Christine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you could substitute belonging for community in most cases. And that's to me kind of the feeling that you want to create, so when they talk about people's, kind of the three needs we have: a sense of autonomy, we have choice and can make decisions, a sense of competence, and then a sense of, whether you call it belonging or relatedness, connection. And arguably, connection is the biggest of three. And so I think that, belonging is, I think it's tough, for people to feel that these days. And so I do think it's a challenge, kind of, to a point.
Great. So why have businesses, or maybe organizations, ignored the concept of community, Christine?
Well, I think part of it is, how does it affect not only their performance, but their revenues and so forth. So trying to shine a light on how it pays, I think, is important.
Yeah.
And, would, I think, get more attention from them in that respect.
Great. So, and when we think of community, is it me and my boss, or is it my coworkers, or how does it come about, Christine?
Well, I think it's any of the above. It's really what drives a sense of connection for you. So ideally, it's all of those. You kind of hope for that. I think, Gallup years ago showed that if you had like one best friend at work, that made all the difference in engagement, which was a shocker for most people, saying like that's the biggest driver of engagement. And yet, that's what they were finding. And so I think you can find it anywhere. And I don't even think that you have to be co-located. Like, I think there's a concern of, are people going to be in hybrid workplace situations or working virtually? And I think, yes, it's easier if you're in person often, but I think that we can drive connection even if we're apart. And so
that's a really good point. A guest I've had on here before, Callie Yost, talks about a flexible workforce. And she says, when it's not an all or nothing proposition, even when you think of hybrid, and I know my clients I work with on this, it's coming in one day a week, but also what needs to be done in place in a work environment, or what can be done in other locations. So I would say if it's a positive workplace, that encourages community. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, it can start anywhere. So like, whether you're a leader or whether you're working on a team, I mean, I think one of the important things is you can start this without a lot of status and power. I mean, one of the people that I really loved in the book, Mastering Community, was this woman who, early on in her career, when she started at Dell, she was managing a call center. And she actually started a workout group because people were gaining a lot of weight, working in the call center. And, she hired a personal trainer. She gave them time off around lunchtime to work out if they wanted to, that didn't take away from kind of their work time. And it really drove a sense of not only connection, people lost a lot of weight, they were far healthier, performance went up like 25%, but she wasn't at a high level. I mean, she was very early in her career. So I don't think you have to be a top leader to kind of start some of these ideas, which could be even outside the workplace, kind of the weekend warrior type idea of working out, or contributing to a cause like Habitat for Humanity, or, some corporate social responsibility aspect. So that's part of.
I love how you dimensionalize that. And because that makes the idea of community much more accessible, but also generative. If we look at it, it's, I have my group or you have your group, not that we're cliques, but my interest is in weight loss and your interest is in the great books, of course, because you're smarter. But no, we can determine according to our interests what we want to do. And, we've seen that before. I mean, I think Robert Putnam wrote about it in Bowling Alone, and how people were, we've always had that with unions had, their solidarity things with sponsoring whatever, at Little League or whatever community activities. And then I think we've become disenfranchised from that. So what's the cost of lack of community? How do you look at it, Christine?
Well, one of the things, so the benefits are like if people feel a sense of community, they're 74% more engaged. They're 81% more likely to stay with the organization. They're 83% more likely to feel a sense of thriving at work. And
that's good. And excuse me for cutting you off, but that's your business equation for why community. You've dimensionalized it because turnover costs money. And so if people want to be there, they're more engaged. And so that's thank you for iterating that. So
yeah, well, I love how it even plugs into this latest spotlight on the Great Resignation, because again, I'm hoping, just like you, that this focus drives, greater connection or community, greater bonding, a sense of belonging for people. And if that's the case, then paying attention to outcomes like turnover, retention are really key as part of this. So I love that. We've also done research that shows when people feel this greater sense of thriving, they tend to perform better objectively as rated by bosses. They're far healthier. They have much less burnout, which we know is really a focus right now. So I think that there are a lot of potential outcomes that speak to a much healthier, happier, more productive workforce that's much more likely to stay for leaders.
Now, in your research, have you saw a link, or do you see a link between purpose, or shall I say many purposes? Is there a connection, Christine? So
I think, generally when people feel a sense of community, one of the things that can drive that and also be a byproduct of that is a sense of meaning, let's say in general or at work, or a sense of purpose, as you say. And so if you can provide meaning for people and remind them of what they're doing, how it contributes, hopefully not only to the team or the organization, but also society or, for others. I think that's really important nowadays to people. They want to feel like they're contributing to people's well-being.
Right. It's interesting. And I had a guest on here who teaches at Michigan, and she's a sociology professor, Erin Sick, and she talks about the problem. Well, I don't remember the title of her book, but the problem of purpose. For those of us who are, quote, knowledge workers or type high achievers, purpose. We have our purpose and we know what it is, but not everyone has a purpose at work. However, the sense of community that you talk about, there's a link in there. Am I correct? So
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you can really get people to care more about what they're doing, where they're at, much more engaged, much more likely to feel that thriving, where they're giving in ways that aren't taxing, that are actually feel good to themselves. Then I think that absolutely that can be a driver.
And it's interesting because I think the connection is that if I have a job which isn't the most rewarding per se, whatever, if I have coworkers to whom I feel attached and we have shared interests, that gives me a reason to go to work, doesn't it? So
yeah, to get up in the morning and to give your best and contribute your all and feel like you're really having a sense of progress, not only for yourself, but for others. And there's a lot of that research. Adam Grant and others show kind of the positive benefits of giving, and that sense of the boost it provides, and that people tend to perform much, much better. And in fact, a lot of that research was done at Michigan with, your affiliation there and everything. And so I think it's been wonderful to show the benefits of how that pays, and again, feed that idea of contributing not only to teams or organizations, but rather to the community as well.
Well, a point of correction. I don't have a formal affiliation. I have an affiliation of the heart, and I live here in Ann Arbor. I cross over that way. But interesting you mentioned that in your previous work, Mastering Civility, and do you see a link between community and civility? So,
yeah, I do. Absolutely. So I think, one way to think about it is that respect or civility leads to greater connection and a sense of community. I think without it, it's easy to see how if there was rudeness or incivility, that people would not feel a sense of belonging, that they would not feel a sense of community, and therefore you wouldn't see so many of these benefits. And so, unfortunately, what that means is if there is someone who's rude or disrespectful, it can really shatter that sense of belonging and it really disable, any sense of community for people.
great. Now, staying on civility for a second, I'm going to turn the tables on you because you are a professor and you teach at the McDonough School at Georgetown. What's their perception of civility? Because the dime store analysis from a side is that students or young people are so rude these days. So what do you see, Christine?
Yeah. I mean, I think over the course of, teaching a couple decades now, I see that
you're not old enough to be teaching a couple decades. Oh, sorry, you started at 15. So yeah.
People they care more about it. I mean, when I started this work, I think it was kind of like, why would we be, paying attention to this? Who cares? I do think that for a very long time with the MBA audience, I struggled with how do you show that civility or respect pays, because in fact, and our data showed this, we finally collected data showing that, like, why are people, sometimes rude? And stress was the number one driver. But the second one was about 50% of people thought that they might be perceived as, less leader-like if they were civil. And that really surprised me, because although I felt that a little bit in the classroom with MBAs, I didn't realize that there was that much fear around they would lose power or status by being that way.
So was their perception that I need to be tough and resilient? Okay. And being civil would undermine that. Okay. And then along comes the idea now of vulnerability. So
yeah. And one of the things that we did was we did collect data on that. And in fact, I even did it with MBAs at Georgetown, but other places as well, to kind of be able to generalize. And what we found is those that were perceived as civil in their network, so in their core, their MBA program, they tended to perform better objectively on all different kinds of ratings. And part of that was what we find in the workplace, which is people are more likely to seek and to share information with those that they perceived as respectful. And that helps drive their performance.
Right. Which leads to the next question is community. So with civility, it's an attribute of community. So what's the students' take on community? So
Well, I think they desperately want it. Like others, I think that even if it wasn't missing in their lives, they feel like that's a strong reason to be somewhere. And that, I know, having taught at USC out at Southern Cal, like that was always branded as a really strong network of people. And people really bought into, I'm not just joining a program for a couple of years, I'm joining a network, a community that I feel really a strong bond with and I want to stay in for the rest of my life. And, I've seen that at UNC as well, having spent time there and recently spending time with their athletic teams there. Just, once you're a part of it, like you're always a Tar Heel, kind of thing. And
Sure.
so that seems to be something that most people tend to really desire. That's a positive.
Well, there was a question it popped into my mind, and it's from the great Peter Drucker, who was perhaps is credited with coining the term knowledge worker. And he said the way that to engage knowledge workers is to look at work as the way volunteer organizations belong. People choose to belong to a volunteer organization. And knowledge workers, those who have skills, choose a workplace. Is there a connection between such a choice and community?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think that that's true. And I hope that organizations follow that moving forward, because especially coming out of this pandemic, I think that that's front of mind for a lot of people, that's a priority, and we're going to choose accordingly.
Okay. So I'm going to really put you on the spot right now. So I'm an executive, one of the many organizations that employ you to come and speak and consult with them. And they go, Christine, how can I create community at my workplace? What would you say? Is there an answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first you try to unite people, so you bring them together, you try to create a sense of them getting to know each other. So in the book, for example, in chapter 1, I open up with maybe, although you set me up for sports examples, but maybe an uncommon situation, which is Phil Jackson and the Chicago Bulls, and how he created this. You wouldn't naturally think a bunch of NBA guys, had this desire necessarily, but where I picked up on this was actually from Steve Kerr saying, I've never felt a sense of, being a part of a team like I did when I was with that team. And it all started with Jackson starting this in what was his film room. So this would be every day the players met before they'd hit the court. This was not about strategy. This was not about, the X's and O's on the court stuff. This was people connecting and conversation. This was Phil Jackson being vulnerable and kind of opening that up for players to open up. And Steve Kerr talked about over, the course of the season, you had people celebrating each other, you had people crying in front of each other, but the team bonded in such a strong way. And really, whether it's Jackson, whether it's others, crediting not only their successful, NBA championships, but also that feeling where they felt so tied, together, and such a sense of camaraderie and everything that I think that that's really what you're striving for. Easier said than done. But I think if we give some examples like that of bringing people together, oftentimes the leader being the one that kind of sets the tone and, opens the conversation to, in Jackson's case, they were talking about different ethics stuff, which ended up, he was providing books for them. He was talking about gun control, the whole work. So I think that part of this is establishing opportunities for people to bond and connect such that they hopefully begin to feel that sense of belonging that you highlighted. And then, you can provide autonomy. I talk about unleashing respect, which is, I think, at the core of so much of this. Like, if you don't feel respect, you're never going to feel a sense of belonging. Radical candor is something that I highlight as far as feedback and being able to provide information on the positives and the negatives so that we're all growing. So like we're all kind of upping our game, providing meaning, which you highlighted, and then taking care of one another. So those would be the levers that have popped in the research over a long period of time that matter the most if you want to create this sense of community where people do thrive.
Great. I mean, we've talked about community extrinsically, so belonging to a club or a volunteer organization. How do we, and I think you've done it, but I'm small brained here. How do we do it intrinsically? And I think it's what you were talking about, the candor, the caring, the respect. That's how we do it internally. So
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that ideally you're making people feel like they belong. I think that that's crucial. I think the idea of making people feel valued. One of the things that always surprises me, particularly when I get into research, is that, people don't receive thanks. It's like once a year at work, and it's kind of like, but that's free. It can be done easily. And so I think that that's, something that can go a long way. I think having this spirit of providing feedback and increasing our self-awareness for one another, I think that's helpful. Even just being heard, because nowadays people feel like they're not being paid attention to, whether it's our phones get in the way or, technology, what have you. And so even just tuning in and listening attentively to people, I think can really help people feel, seen, heard, valued. They feel like connected.
Those three things dovetail with what we would call connectedness. And, simply sharing space with someone. That's an idea that I learned from, and I know his work, Father Greg Boyle at Homeboy Industries, who created the largest gang intervention program, giving people a sense of giving ex-gang or gang members creating a community where they felt they belong and there was self-respect for them. But he talked about reaching them, and it's this form of we're all in this together, and it's an honesty, and it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of courage. So.
Yeah, and I love his examples. We connected on this because we were both kind of looking at them as very inspiring. And I think his books, what's really timely is the idea of bringing these, rival gangs together, members of these gangs. And, they may start out thinking, I hate them, I could never,
well, they do hate each other.
Yeah, exactly.
They are taught to hate one another. Yes.
Yeah. And yet, he's able to kind of open up their eyes and their selves to soon they're laughing together, they're working together, they're sticking up for one another, and so you just see the power of, as deep as some of these gang roots are, how you can unite people that are previously very divided. And given our current society, I just think it's a super inspiring example and one that we can learn from.
One of the keys to that, of bringing disparate people together, and that's what Homeboys does, is that they are rival gang members must do a task or a job together. Mm-hmm. So that is that. And then in a workplace, hopefully we don't have the gangs, but we are working together. So in a sense, we're already one step toward creating community. Is that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the other thing that I love about his examples, he certainly doesn't highlight himself, but I think of, what's the correlate in organizations, and that is the idea of leaders as role models. And you think of the way he interacts with all of them and with each other, in partnership and things like that. And I just think it's really beautiful. Again, these days, I think we need examples like that. And I think we do well to see, how could we replicate some of the things that he's doing at Homeboy in our organizations or our communities?
Well, I think that with the example of Father Boyle is that he is a father figure, both spiritually and but also most importantly a human figure. So, and what's the key to that is the giving, and that's the challenge for leaders. How much of yourself do you give? How much of yourself do you invest? And those are questions, and each person needs to determine it for himself. Would you think so?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely, and I love the way, anyone that picks up his books, I literally was laughing out loud, a lot. And so I think he does this with humor, with candor, with transparency, with, he's very approachable, but very vulnerable. He talks about challenges and shares stories. And I just think, but the other thing is, what you hit on, which is, he's kind of always there for them,
yeah.
And so they literally are turning to him, 24/7 if they need that kind of support or guidance or help, and so that generosity of spirit, almost that servant leadership that we hear.
On servant leadership on steroids. So, I mean, it's incredible. Christine, we are racing along and coming to the end of our show, sadly. I ask every guest a story of grace. Do you have one you want to share with us?
Sure. So recently, I am on sabbatical and was featuring Anson Dorrance, who is the women's soccer coach at UNC Chapel Hill, and won a lot of national championships and had a lot of success, even with the U.S. national team. And he actually invited me to their preseason and to learn how they built culture. And so I went, and I ended up staying the whole season and just learning a ton from not only him and the coaching staff, but other coaches at UNC, and then, the women that play on the team and athletes there in general. And it just was a really wonderful learning experience that was super inspiring. And, they offered me a lot of grace, as you write about so eloquently, in terms of just the generosity of spirit, welcoming. I was like an injured player. I mean, I went to everything. I got to see it all happen, and catch all of those beautiful human moments and the challenges as well. And I think it was really helpful for me, especially, during this isolating time, to be affiliated, talk about meaning for me, just my love of sports, but also that ability to kind of plug into not only a team, but a whole community there. I really it really, changed me.
Well, what a powerful story. And it leads to, you mentioned the grace and culture, but community. And so for one who has a book called Mastering Community, what a wonderful story of grace. Christine, it's wonderful to have you here. How can people find you? So
I have a website, ChristinePorath.com, where I try to post things, LinkedIn, Porath C, and on Twitter and things like that. So, yeah.
Great. Christine, it has been a pleasure to have you. Thank you, my friend. And with that, we will go out. So.